Fiat, everyone! My name is Bobby Shortle, and I'm here with Nick Rocco Scalia, and we are the Intrepid Filmographers. Every miniseries we chart a course through the full filmography of an under-discussed genre or journeyman filmmaker. In this expedition, we do our best to try and be explorers, using our years of film knowledge to help guide us, but always being open to discovering new things about the medium we love so much. We are currently embedded in the films of Joe Wright, and today we head to the land of Tolstoy for Anna Karenina and see what's worse, breaking the law or breaking the rules. Nick, how you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing great. I feel for the first time in my life like I'm a little bit of a Russian lit scholar, which is pretty cool.
I don't know anything about this book. I have never read it. I've never read any Tolstoy. I do own a copy of Crime and Punishment, but have not read it. So there you go. Yeah, I never had to read. I was an English major in undergrad, and we never had to read any Tolstoy. That was never...
I was going to ask, I have this goal. I'm probably never going to reach this goal. I always wanted to read War and Peace, because War and Peace is like the stereotypical, good for you, long, hard book to read. And I've read a bunch of people that said, if you want to do that, like if you're working your way up to that, actually Anna Karenina is a really good place to start, which I guess I can sort of see how that would be. So still haven't read it or any of it, but now I do feel like I would like to. So maybe this is the start of something. Okay.
The other day.
Oh, is that right now? All right.
Yes, I have it in the other room.
You're going to get to it before I do. Okay.
I mean, just I took it out in the library, Nick, does not mean I'm going to get to it. There's been plenty of library books I've checked out in the last couple of years that I have never read, but
that's one of my favorite Seinfeld episodes is Philip Baker Hall. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Fantastic.
And my dad loves that episode so much. I love that episode too, but he loves it because...
Your dad has great taste. It's fantastic.
My dad is an ex-FBI agent. And he loves the portrayal of this guy who acts like he's an FBI agent, but he works for the library. You know,
it is. I could see how that would be a realistic portrayal of law enforcement.
Yeah. So we are here to talk about Anna Karenina, the 2012 adaptation directed by Joe Wright and written by Tom Stoppard, and starring Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadyen and Aaron Taylor Johnson and Jude Law and Alicia Vikander and Domhnall Gleeson. Once again, Joe Wright really getting people in his movies before they're about to just explode and be in a bunch of really huge movies. 2 years later.
And getting all the right people back together except for Tom Hollander.
Yeah, no Tom Hollander, which...
How did they not find a place for Tom Hollander in this movie? I'm the
feels
world's
like a
biggest
Tom Hollander
fan. After the last few episodes of this show.
It feels like the perfect Tom Hollander movie, to be honest with you. But we spent the last few episodes talking about, I think in many ways, how he was trying to sort of run away or at least distance himself from these handsomely mounted kind of book literary adaptations. And here he has returned back, I think, sort of into what you would assume would be safe ground when you hear Joe Wright's doing Anna Karenina and Tom Stoppard wrote it. And you're like, okay, here we go. Handsomely mounted, period piece. I know what I'm getting. And then when you watch this movie, I think in no way would it be, you're getting what you would expect to be getting, right? So it's a very interesting take on the material, on doing a period piece, on interpreting classic literature. This is also the first Joe Wright movie we are covering that I full on have not seen at all. We have entered the from now on territory of Joe Wright movies I have not seen. It kind of floored me that thinking about the fact that it came out in 2012 and I hadn't seen it, because I was still seeing a lot of movies in 2012 and I just completely ignored this one, even though, as we talked about last time, I had really, really loved Hannah when it had come out. So it was very interesting that I didn't really have any interest. And I think it was because I was like, I don't want to watch boring period piece based on, I don't want to see a movie that's school. That's right. That kind of feeling.
Well, this was before my white whale thing about War and Peace. So I would have, I figured I had gotten through all of that without doing any Russian literature. So it's maybe I can just sort of live without it for the rest of my life. And then you get a little bit older and it's like, no, I want to be a smart person. I want to know these things. And I think if I had known more about what this movie was doing, because I don't remember a trailer for it. I remember reading about it, but I don't remember anything about the style. I thought it was going to be exactly one of those films, knowing Joe Wright being that sort of Handsomely Mounted is going to be that's the title of the book we're going to write about him, I think.
Yes.
The study of Joe Wright's films.
Yes.
This show is all just it's a stealth way of just getting a critical study on one of these filmmakers done, or all of these filmmakers done.
It's our way of making an excuse to do our research and do our, make our notes and get our footnotes down and cite our sources.
We're building in like a built-in audience, and then we can get an advance for the book on Joe Wright. Handsomely Mounted, the Joe Wright story.
Yeah. All the publishers.
People are going to think that's a totally different thing than what it actually is.
All the publishers knocking down the doors to try to see who's going to write the Joe Wright book.
That's
Absolutely.
The book industry is doing so well right now. Yeah, this is the time. The time is ripe for the Joe Wright book.
Yes, this stock has never been higher than it is right now. So yeah, I will say this. I'm going to assume that whoever's listening to this, most people have not seen this movie because it was not a movie that did great in America. Let's say it
made as much money internationally, though. Actually, I think a little bit more than Hannah did, which is crazy to me because I remember that movie being a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it kind of flip flop though as far as box office goes. Like it was.
Well, the rest of the world's more sophisticated than us.
Yes.
They're more into something like this.
I mean, I think probably if you look at probably the confluence of a couple things, I think, these kind of movies not being in vogue, I think at this point, people have started to sort of turn on the Keira Knightley thing. She's no longer the new thing anymore. And I think at this point, people have been like, well, we know what her thing is. Like, we like her, but like, she's going to do a ton of these movies and we can ignore this one. I think it's probably what a lot of people felt at the time. And I think I came to this movie at the right time or in the right quadrant of my life, because I feel like if I had watched it, 13 years ago, I would have been a little shithead about it, and I this time around, I think I was ready to, dive into the exploration of the form like he's doing in this movie.
Well, I think I was more pretentious at the time. So like the fact that I didn't know what this movie was going to be. I didn't know anything about the style of it, but I feel like, and maybe I feel the same way now, I would have just raved about what this movie is trying to do and the audacious moves that he's making here. And I would have tried to say this was like the most brilliant thing probably. And now I'm, as I said before the show, I'm a little bit of two minds about it, but this is his, like maybe his most divisive movie that we've talked about thus far.
Probably. I mean, I don't know.
Like nobody loves The Soloist, right? The other movies are like,
no.
They have their detractors, but like nobody like hates the shit out of them. And there's definitely some very, very negative reviews of this one. And
yes, I guess critically, yes. Like I was saying, I don't think it's tough to be divisive when nobody knows it exists, but that's the other part of it.
People outside of the U.S. know that it exists.
Yes, but not even that, to be fair, not even that many people outside the U.S. know that it exists. It's not like it made... like it's like Warcraft and it made like $700 million overseas. It made like, like 56. So it did well. And I'm sure most of that comes from probably, I don't want to, assume, but I'm going to say other English speaking quadrants of the world, because although this movie is about a classic Russian novel, it's about a British movie as you can possibly get, and with its cast. And I think even its manners and tone, I think, are obviously also very British. But I think probably the right move, because obviously classic move, right? To take a novel or a play or something from a different country, set it in that country, but everyone has an English accent. That's just classic Hollywood stuff, classic movie making stuff. But also I think I would much rather that than people speaking with a bunch of fake, Russian accents. I think that would be a way worse version of this movie. Let's just live in the theatricality, literally of the film, and just know that these people are not Russian, but you're supposed to just imagine that it's Russia. But so in our dossier for the movie, so I guess we should say people have probably been seeing the movie. So let's describe what the movie is, which is, it's this classic, right? We mentioned this, Leo Tolstoy, classic Russian novel, epic novel, right? About a woman who is married to a upstanding, he's not a prince, right? What is he? Yes. Yes. and a very religious man, a very God-fearing, dedicated to God man. She has an affair with a Russian soldier.
A count. I mean, he's a man of means also.
He is,
Vronsky.
but he's also a soldier, though. He's in the army.
Well, he's like Prince Harry, wasn't he in the army?
Yeah, but
also?
I think he feels like a little bit more. I mean, I don't know. I can't really tell from this version of the movie, right?
I don't know. I got some Prince Harry vibes from him.
But he is. So she has an affair with him, and sort of sets a path of almost personal destruction for her life and the people's lives around her, as well as these other kind of stories that are happening, which are also tales of sort of love and getting together or breaking up, and how they all sort of differ and how they are the same.
Yeah, and how that contrasts with royal duty and standing and
yes.
And this sort of aristocratic world where things are looked down upon. As you mentioned before, it's probably the biggest concept. Again, haven't read the novel, but it is expressed really nicely in the movie, the idea about breaking the rules and breaking the law.
Yes.
So, and this is the society in which the rules are kind of more important than the law, and to break the rules, to impropriety is the worst thing, whereas crime, actual law breaking, is looked at as bad. Not that it's okay or acceptable, but it's way worse to go against the sort of standards and morals of the aristocracy.
Yes, and all of that to be said, the film, which you would assume is set in big, lavish, lush locations across different cities and different places with locations shots done in Russia, it is not. It is shot in a completely built from the ground up for this film theater space where the story is kind of told, almost, I don't even know how to describe it really, but it's sort of staging these scenes. And
everything is theatrical, right?
Yeah,
like there are no establishing shots. There's backdrops. There's this one moment early on where they basically create the set around the actors as they're sort of starting the scene. So like not stagehands, but actual people in the scene are bringing in the walls and the furniture and stuff like that. So it is constantly calling attention to its own theatricality.
Yes.
When we're traveling by train from one city to another, which trains are very, very important in this story.
It's a hell of a lot of trains.
Yes, there are. Negative reviews. I believe this Mick LaSalle in the San Francisco Chronicle hated this movie and said it's not a good thing for an Anna Karenina adaptation when you're rooting for the train. Which I guess we'll get to that. But every time we're traveling by train, it's a toy train moving through like a model landscape. There are some exteriors. There are some scenes set in the real world, but it's a huge departure. Like most of the film, because it is so confined by this theater space, it really is like when they actually open up the doors and we see a beautiful outdoor landscape behind it, it's kind of shocking. It's one of the like jaw drop moments in the movie. Like, oh, I didn't think we were doing this, because literally the entire theater space, you go up into like the rafters and there's stuff happening up there. You go beneath the stage, and in the backstage area, they're staging scenes. They're creating locations there. But ultimately, we always kind of come back to the stage and where the audience would be. There's an incredible, it might be the greatest scene in the movie, where there's a horse race, which is completely done on the stage. And everything is either a backdrop or it's all theatrical. Everything is a set. And,
I mean, before we get into qualitative judgment about it, I just want to make it clear to people.
I wasn't going to. I was still trying to explain it, but I think I've probably said enough. Go ahead.
All right. Oh, I was just going to say, because you did like a sigh, like you were getting into like, and here's how I feel about it. So I just wanted to make sure.
No, I wasn't. You're right. I was thinking about it, but I wasn't quite going there yet.
Just so people can picture it in their heads if they're not watching the movie. This isn't like a thing where there are people sitting in the audience like watching Keira Knightley do these scenes. Like it's not that abstracted, but because they use the entire, like Nick said, the entire theater, the entire space, but it is meant to call, sort of into the fore, like you are watching something that is being staged. This isn't, you do not try to break this down and be like, well, this period thing isn't totally true. And the way they're performing or where they are or whatever is not exactly period, right? They want to do it with all of that. So you're really feeling just, the scenes, the acting, the sort of artifice of the world in which these people inhabit, you are also feeling as an audience member is sort of what they're trying to portray. And yeah, that's really what I feel like that is going for.
And a lot of it, right? Like I mentioned the audience space, right? Like there aren't audiences in this movie, but they're extras, right? They're people on the train platform. They're people at an opera. They're people at a ball that are watching these because a lot of the story is about that, right? It's about how society, how the rest of the aristocracy views these people that are kind of central to the story. So there are like a lot of scenes that are audience spaces, and they just become the audience in the film. They are like in the audience space in the theater, but they are, there is a reason for them to be there. They're not just they're not us, right? They're not the audience watching the movie or watching the play, but they are participants, observers and participants in the scenes. That's kind of brilliant, I think. Sorry, I know we're not putting our cards on the table yet, but boy, do I really like that.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I say the other thing, if you want some touchstone points, I guess, for the movie, people who are maybe listening who haven't watched the movie, I think, obviously a couple things that are Charlie Kaufman related come to mind, which is Synecdoche, New York, or Synecdoche, New York. I don't ever know how you actually supposed to say
it's Synecdoche in English major. Come on.
Okay.
You know that.
This obviously, I think that's one of the most like biggest parallels you can make, right, between movie many people have seen, which is this idea of like theater and life sort of being intertwined. Once again, unlike that movie, there isn't like a show that they're actually putting on that's part of it, but the way things move through space and the way scenes connect are very similar. Also, something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is also something where you have those scenes where you're in the memories and the memories are breaking down, you're kind of transferring from one memory to another, and it's not exactly like this smooth, like you said, establishing shot. We're in this new scene now. It's kind of like scenes are moving one into another and there's not a break in them. That happens a lot in Anna Karenina. Like that is, I think, one of the chief sort of motivating factors of the action, right, is we are going to, so this thing is only about 2 hours long. We are not going to spend a lot of time being like long language shots of trains, going through the Russian countryside, and like, let's do a lot of establishing stuff of these houses and
here's a cityscape of Moscow. We don't have any of that.
It's all cut down.
I will say, I mean, although these films have a bunch of that, reminded me a lot of Baz Luhrmann's movies.
Yes, Baz Luhrmann's also a good touchdown.
Moulin Rouge and definitely Gatsby also, his great Gatsby.
Yes.
Again, just for playing up the theatricality of that story and the spectatorship aspects of that story, it's an interesting choice to do. You look, like these are works of like, we're both talking out of school here a little bit, but like if you know anything about Anna Karenina, like that is one of the great novels ever written, right? Like that is, you would think like people like us who have, studied in the humanities and been in all those classes and like one of us should have read that at some point, right?
Yes. Well, yeah. There's a lot of books, Nick.
There's a lot of books, true, but like if you really had to narrow it down to a few dozen books, that would be one of them. And, like, what's the approach that you take to those, right? Like, obviously they are worth adapting for films. It is, this is a story about love and sex and romance and impropriety and, what people's desires and things like that. So it does have a very human sort of things in it. And it's very easy, I think, to adapt this just kind of straight, right? Like there has been a number of adaptations. There's a mini-series.
There's got to be at least 10. I can't even imagine there's less than 10, right?
Vivian Leigh played Anna Karenina once. So, it's been done before. So you can do the reverent version of it. But also, these things are 100+ years old. Can you take a more playful approach to it, even though it's not a very playful story? I think once something gets to that point, there's maybe an opportunity to do that. And Joe Wright certainly took that here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things on one of the special features on the Blu-ray, what Keira Knightley says in one of them is like, if we're going to do this, why do it the safe way, right? It's already been done. And even Joe Wright talks about, there's some stories, right? In the dossier that you put together, there's an article an interview that he talks about that they changed gears like 3 weeks before production was supposed to start. And who knows if that's true. But the one thing I think is definitely true when you listen to all these different accounts is Tom Stoppard wrote an adaptation of Anna Karenina and they hired Joe Wright to direct it, and it was originally going to be a very straight, very what you would expect period piece, much like he'd done before with Pride and Prejudice. It was going to be a down the middle period drama epic like we've seen a million of before.
And he even took flack, as we were talking about, for doing Pride and Prejudice the way he did, where he
Yes.
changed a few minor details. He changed the setting a little bit. He made it a little bit more earthy and rural. And there were people who hated that. But basically, that is Jane Austen's story. I mean, it was very, very faithful to kind of the spirit of it. And, in some ways, this is as well. But I thought Wright himself basically said, this is in some way my least stylized movie, which is a ballsy thing to say.
It's an insane thing to say.
But he basically says that that all of the style here is strictly in service of the story, and it is not to be show-offy. And I'm not sure that that's true, but
yeah,
I do. So he wants you to be able to focus on the characters. It's a straight adaptation in the sense that it's not a parody, it's not a satire. No. I mean, it's an emotional story. It's a tragic story. The ending is very tragic, and it does follow that thread. We're not meant to. I mean, there are witty moments. It's Tom Stoppard, so there's always going to be a little bit of that. There's some great lines. There's some great dialogue, but ultimately we are meant to feel this. It is meant to be an emotional experience, and I think in a lot of ways it is.
I would agree with you on that, and I think that one of the things that Wright said when he was planning the film was he started talking to people in Russia about securing locations. And he's like, you talk to these location scouts, or you talk to these like the film board there, and they're like, yes, we've done 8, Anna Karenina's here's where you shoot this, here's where you shoot that, and he felt also very boxed in by that as well. And also there were budgetary concerns, right? It was like they were going to have access to these locations for a very short amount of time. So how can you shoot all this stuff that fast? You're going to shoot most of it in England anyway, and you're going to spend all this money going to Russia and basically get establishing shots. Really what it would have come down to. And then you got to go back to England and you got to build sets and you got to do all this stuff anyway. And, I think although never making a movie with an exorbitant budget, he does have high budgets for the kind of movies that he makes. And I think at this point, he's got a little bit of your movies don't make money sort of, reputation probably going. People like your movies, but the last 2, one of them was a complete belly flop. The other one was not going to be anywhere near its awards consideration anyway. And it didn't break out in like an action movie Bourne sort of way. So where are you now? Right. And so now he goes, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And I guarantee you can see in his head the budget just ballooning, right? Because if I go to Russia, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And maybe smartly, he is like, no, there's another way we can do this where we can make it interesting and new. We keep the same exact script. And that's what they said too. We didn't change the script. Right. The script is exactly the script that he wrote. And it works in this manner because we are not, like you said, it's not a parody. We're not calling out that we're on a stage. There's no meta-ness to the writing, to the text of the movie. So it all exists in the filmmaking, and even that isn't meta in the way that you talk about where you're calling out.
You're not seeing Joe Wright here sitting behind the camera, Abbas Kiarostami has done stuff like that.
He's not the director in the audience
has
being
done that.
sure.
It's not a new wave movie. No, I mean, it's audacious in a lot of ways. He, in that same, it's an IndieWire article that's quoting from an Empire article that I can't find. I get so frustrated doing research on these movies. The internet is just gone, right? Yeah. All the stuff you're looking for, that dead internet theory stuff. I'm starting to think that's true because you go looking for it and it's just dead links everywhere, and you get the Google AI synopsis of stuff. So when you find something close to an original source, it's a wonderful thing to find.
You got to use the way back machine. That's the one you got to use.
But even that, there's a lot of stuff not there. But I was able to find this IndieWire article, and Wright said that his inspiration, whether it was 3 weeks before, which there's no way you could do this in 3 weeks, create this incredible set and choreograph this movie.
I know. I would believe that 3 weeks before they were set to start shooting the more traditional one, he was like, let's stop and
push things back.
And there's no way because they built this entire theater, at Shepperton Studios. And amazing. I mean, the theater, I would have believed it was a real theater, like an old theater that existed.
Well, maybe,
how
but the way they
beautiful it looks.
move through it, you would have
Yeah.
had to kind of build something from scratch. But what he was saying was the idea was he read a book from like 2002 on Russian history about the Russian aristocracy. And the thesis of that book was that it was all kind of performative in this era, right? Like, but, pre-Russian Revolution era, it's like everyone was just kind of playing a role and putting on a show. And, the way they dressed, the way they talked, the way, the social scene, the ball and everything that he covers so well in Pride and Prejudice was all performative. It was all like, the whole world's a stage and real feeling, which is about what this movie is about, was something that you subsumed for to basically go out and play this character, this wealthy, countess, princess, etc. And so it is, form kind of follows function, I think, in a really interesting way here. And I get why he did it. I like the choice. I don't always like the way it plays out, but I think it's a really fascinating way to tell this story.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's the history of the movie. That's what the movie's about. It's important for us to talk about it because I think it's such a part of what this movie is and whether you like it or not, right? And, my cards on the table, I kind of loved this movie. I think every time we've done one of these directors, I've been like, is this one going to be like the secret great movie that we just didn't realize was going to be great? And for me, that's what this was. This was like the first one we found really that this was like the one, right? The one that I didn't know anything about, that I'd kind of written off once I did hear about it. And now that I've watched it, I think that it's pretty special. And, going back to when we talked about Atonement, and this is why I like the fact that even though sometimes it's tough, we do every single one of these directors' films because we might have, like, if we were just like doing like a best of Joe Wright, we might have skipped this one, right? We might have just, we might have skipped this one or whatever. But this direct comparison I want to pull to Atonement, when we talked about Atonement, what I said was, I love almost everything about it, but there's an artificiality to the way he makes the movie that I don't think he's embracing, that I think he's trying to, it creates a separation between reality and the reality of the movie and the reality of the filmmaking. And I think they're at war with each other. And this one, I think, is the perfect marriage of those two things, where the artificiality is the point of it. So it doesn't distract me because I'm like, okay, no, that's the thing here. So all I have to do is focus on the other stuff because I know that I'm signing up for this kind of artificial veneer of how he's staging everything, how the camera moves, how scenes transition, the showiness or the fluidity is the point. So I think that really helped sell it to me in many, many ways. And, I think that it's incredibly well acted, some really great performances. Kind of crazy that we are is it 8 years after Pride and Prejudice? Was Pride and Prejudice 2004? When was Pride and Prejudice?
2005.
2005. So we're 7 years out. And Matthew Macfadyen has pretty much gone full transformation from hunky leading man to who he will be from now on, which is this sort of like still handsome, but kind of goofy sort of, oafish type of guy who has something like kind of erudite about him, but also sort of like schmucky about him, right? And I think
we also have to have that conversation about Jude Law because I feel like you make this 10 years earlier and Jude Law plays Vronsky.
Of course, 100%.
Now he's like perfect in this role of Karenin, who is just, he is just boredom on toast. And it's, I don't know. I felt my own mortality a little bit, right? Like I remember Jude Law being like that handsome leading man guy. And now he's playing this role. And this one is like the opposite of that.
This was 13 years ago.
Yeah, no, I know.
And I think at the time, obviously, it's a really big departure for him. I think at this time, he's never really done anything like this before. Like he's still in most movies playing a handsome sort of, leading man guy, and in this, it's such a different story for him. And, I think he is exceptional in the movie. And those moments where he's so even keel and so the same for so much of it that it makes the moments where that changes, where it breaks, so much more effective. Aaron Taylor Johnson, who plays Vronsky, I think we've talked about him before. He's an actor who I'm extremely hot and cold on. There are times where I think he's great. There are times where I think he's just nothing, that a lot of the time. This movie's so interesting because I don't really know if he's very good in it or he's exceptional in it, but he certainly has his crazy blue eyes do a lot of work in the movie.
Well, and the costume design, which won an Oscar, it's the clothing, the tailoring. He's meant to be a little bit superhuman in this, and he definitely and Keira Knightley, radiant as always.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, but I think there's some very, very good acting in this. Wonderful supporting cast, as you were saying, of people who would go on to do bigger and better things. Many of them not initially cast in the movie and just kind of replay, like Alicia Vikander was not supposed to be in this. I always thought Ex Machina was like her debut, and that was quite a few years after this.
Not too many years after this, but 2 years after this.
It was a few. Anyway, was the movie where I sort of learned who she was. I like her a lot.
Yes, well, because no one saw this movie, Nick.
Was love that. The thing. I said I was of two minds about this movie. Like, is it a little too theatrical? Does that get in the way of my emotional connection to it? Not at first, because I'm so dazzled by it. I think in the first half, which I watched 3 times, so I'm very familiar with the first half of this one, and I'm glad to have seen it a few times. It's my first time seeing the film, and I watched. I didn't finish it. I kept having to go back. My rentals kept running out. So then I just bought it, which I'm glad I did, because I will watch it again many times, probably. But I was able to watch it one time just to see the staging of it and the choreography, which I thought was brilliant. That I'm definitely not in question about. And then, I watched it again, and it's okay, can I get fully invested in this story the way this is told? And I think ultimately the answer is yes. And so therefore, if I can do both, then yeah, this is a great movie, and it's really worth seeing, and it's really something. But I will say, I want to see another version of this story, like a more straightforward version of this story. And that's going to maybe change my opinion of this, right? If there is an Anna Karenina that can grab me a little harder with the ending and sort of the tragic, this is really a rise and fall sort of narrative. It kind of, the first half is kind of all the way up, and the second half is, this crashing down to earth thing that happens over basically an hour of running time. I'm wondering if I would feel that a little bit more in a different type of movie. This is, I think, because it's the only version of the story I know. That's the only reason I question whether this is the right version of the story. I don't know what I'm,
You're talking yourself out of it, Nick. I would say
I might be talking myself out of it a little bit.
I would say whether or not this is the most emotionally effective version of the Anna Karenina story, I can't speak to, because obviously, again, it's the only version that I have seen, and I very much willing to say there's probably a way you could make this more traditionally that would really pack a punch and feel maybe a little bit more traditionally tragic for the lead character, but I will say this, I think that if you do a straight up version of this story, you deeply run the risk of it being deeply boring. This movie could have been 3.5 hours long, and it could have had some great performances, and it could have been really nicely made, and it still would have suffered for you because you just lose it in the middle of it. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's what I'm wondering. I'm just wondering if I saw a more straightforward version of this, would it cloud my opinion of this? Because I do. I think I capital L love this movie. You just kind of alluded to this. The pacing of this is unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
I went into this thinking this is going to be a boring movie. I don't mind. I like boring movies. I like classic literature. I was fine with that, but I was never bored, not for a second. This thing just goes and goes and goes. It's a little over 2 hours. And it barely feels it. I did not mind, even when I had to go back, it was never a chore. I have to sit through the first hour of this again to get to the second hour. It's no, I can't wait to see that again. And I remember this happens and this happens. It's a lot of incident, and there's a lot of fireworks. I don't know what the best word for it is, but you've got these incredible, there's this ball scene that's kind of shot like a horror movie. That's brilliant. Like I mentioned, the horse race, there's some comedy, some wonderful comedy in this that I was not expecting at all. Just little witty moments and some nice sort of character work that I think is a lot of fun, which I did not think fun would be on the table here. There's some really harrowing stuff. There's some kind of dark moments. There's some character-based drama where it's not knowing the story is is somebody gonna die here? Is someone getting murdered in this scene? It's kind of a lot of that. And, thankfully these characters have a little bit more decorum than that. But yeah, I was really very, very just engaged by it, kind of just swept up in the story, and it goes by in a flash. For a 2-hour and 10-minute adaptation of a traditionally thought of as a difficult and, good for you kind of novel. It's a pretty exciting movie.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the balance in tones, I think, is what makes it propel like that. Like I mentioned, Matthew McFadden before, but he is genuinely very funny in this movie.
He is. And his character is such a dirtbag, but also kind of very, very likable.
Very likable. Again, this is the Matthew McFadden persona that I know from something like Succession. Like this is what he has kind of morphed his career into. And he's got this giant ass mustache, and the whole story sort of really is his fault in many ways, because it begins with this affair he's having with his nanny, the nanny of his children, and his wife is going to divorce him, and his sister, who's Anna Karenina, has to come and visit and sort of, make it so they don't get
convince her to stay with him, even though he's a womanizing piece of shit. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And in that process, she meets Vronsky, and that starts her down this road to eventually her ruin, right? And obviously, some of the stuff I'm going to say is very much just about probably the novel Anna Karenina, right? But, the lead character herself is such a fascinating lead character for something, because she is both sort of hero of the story and villain of the story kind of at the same time. And it's exceptionally hard needle to thread for an actor to play a character like that. And I think Knightley does a great job. Do I think that she nails all aspects of it? I don't think so, but I think for an extremely difficult role to play, she does a really, really great job. And, it's really this practice in, are you able to watch and experience this story with a kind of unlikable central character in many ways, a character who's acting mostly selfishly throughout the whole story, but also placed against a backdrop of a time in a world where, she was really doing something that never was done, right? But with what she was trying to do is something that women weren't allowed to do, right? And even in this world won't let her do it, really. And that's kind of also what leads to her demise, by the end of the story. So there's some sort of, push and pull to how you feel about her sort of at all times, And I think that, again, I don't know if the book is this way or not, but, the Jude Law character is an intensely decent person, right? He's like
mostly. I mean, he has his moments, but yeah, he is.
Yeah, but his wife is having an affair with somebody right under
absolutely.
his
nose. And it's not even about the marriage. It's just that's going to blow everything up for him, right?
Yeah.
Like this job, this very important government job that he has. I mean, like even Vronsky is not the most unsympathetic character. Like he's acting very selfishly also, but on the other hand, he's likable and you sort of understand where he's coming from as well. And that's interesting, that there's no easy answers here. And I think one of the things that this movie gets right is that, right? To sort of have that tension be part of almost every scene.
Yeah. That being said, all the nice things we're saying about it, I can absolutely see, and I think we talked about this via text when we were watching it originally, I can absolutely see why someone would watch this movie and be like, I hate this, right? Like you can absolutely see why that would be the case. You can absolutely see people being turned off by it. It is a very particular style and delivery of narrative. Forget about the fact it's based on a classic novel and you might be upset that the classic novel isn't being adapted in the way that you envision or want it. But as a movie in itself, if this was any story, right? You could be put off by this, just like those Charlie Kaufman movies I talked about before. A lot of people are put off by that style. This is, I think I wrote my notes, this is like Lars von Trier if he didn't hate you, right? This is like that. This is what this story is kind of like, and so it's
Dogville is another film this is heavily compared to. Yeah,
absolutely. But, obviously not as a movie that's not actively sort of like battling with its audience, right?
Right.
But, so it's somewhere in the middle of those things, and it's not what you expect when you go in to see a movie like this. And so I totally understand why people would be, put off by it.
What I meant to do, and I didn't do this, and I should have, I watched the movie, the first half of the movie anyway, so many times. I want to watch the trailer because how do you market this?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you don't want people going into this not knowing, right? It's not a twist. It's like the opening shot of this film is a theater, it's a stage, and we never really go to that a theater in the movie. We go to the opera and stuff like that. So that is showing you, right? Like this is all going to take place in this theater space on this stage. And the closing shot, which is one of my favorite things I think ever, kind of brings us back there in a really fascinating way. But like, you can't like just buy a ticket to this movie or rent this movie not knowing that it's going to do this. And I think it'd be very, very hard to follow.
Yeah.
First of all, I mean, it's, you know, how are these people in this place and now they're in this place and this character just came out of nowhere, and it doesn't follow those rules of, you know, establishing shots and master shots and stuff like that. It's kind of flowing through in a way that can be, you know, a little difficult if you're not ready for it. I was ready. I knew what it was, and that's one of the things that really made me excited about it. But I could definitely see that being a real stumbling. Like, I liked this movie enough where I want to recommend it to people, but I'd have to be very selective about who I recommend it to, because if you're looking for a straightforward movie, this is not that at all.
Yeah, you know, and I think he tries in the opening sequence, right, to try to acclimate you to the rules, or it
teaches you how to watch it. Yes.
Yeah, because we're jumping back and forth kind of with that letter as our only sort of symbol that we're in different places, right? But even at the beginning, I think he's intentionally confusing you at first so that when it comes into focus about where these different people are, it hopefully will lock in for you how the movie is going to tell its story, right? Because once you're unconfused in that opening, you're like, oh, okay, I see. She's here with him and they're in this other place, right? So you get that sort of vibe and feeling from it, right? And I think that's him trying to do it. But what I do think about this movie and the slight confusion this movie can bring to you, which I think includes this idea of like obfuscating, are these people royalty? Because some of them are princesses and princes. Are these, you know, aristocrats? Are these people in the government? Are these regular soldiers, or just like, you know, people who are soldiers in name only? I think it does give you that feeling of when you read a book like this, when you're, you know, maybe a little bit younger, or maybe or you're just not used to reading classic literature, and you're like, I'm confused about what exactly is happening here.
Yeah. You sort of introduce characters and you don't get a good sense of what their role is. And this way, you know, I will say the first time I watched the first half of this, not knowing anything about, I mean, I knew it took place amongst the Russian aristocracy, but like the way people are related to one another, who's sibling, who works for, you know, the government, who's a wealthy landowner, stuff like that, you know, which are very important things, obviously, in this world. It's very, very like, so you're trying to acclimate yourself to this theatrical style, which you're not used to. And also you're just trying to figure out, you know, how do these characters connect? I mean, we don't see, like, Anna Karenina is the center of this story, but she's not even close to the first character we meet, right?
Oh, no.
We start in Steva's home, and we don't even meet him yet at that point. So it's a lot, you know, it's a lot to take in the first 10, 15 minutes of this. It does click into place. I mean, that's the other thing. It kind of explains itself, I think, very, very clearly, but it takes a little while, not an hour, but it takes 10, 15 minutes to get there.
Yeah. And I think also what it's trying to communicate to you, right, is like if they're in St. Petersburg or Moscow, it doesn't really matter.
It's
right?
also incestuous, right? Like everyone knows everyone's business.
Yeah, no matter where they go, all this stuff follows them. The same people follow them.
We're on the same trains going back and forth. And, you know, we're running into, she meets Vronsky's mother, like early in the film. It's like, Olivia Williams is great in this movie.
Yes.
Like, are we going to see her again? Actually, yes. And her son's going to be very important in this. But, you know, it just seems like this aside, this like one scene character that ends up being pretty important.
Yeah.
Well, not her, but, you know, she's part of something important.
She sets up something very important, right?
Sure,
and she does end up being sort of one of the things, right, that drives, you know, Anna and Vronsky apart eventually, right?
Yeah, we get nasty Olivia Williams toward the end of this film. I love nasty Olivia Williams is, good stuff.
And I think a lot of this too, what I think a lot of the sort of the obfuscation also makes you feel is like, obviously by the end of the movie, the end of the story, Anna her mental state has completely fallen apart, right? She's, you know, drinking. She's kind of lost her place in the world. And this other thing she ran to is also falling apart. And she's also part of the reason why that thing is falling apart. So this sort of blurred line between like what's real and what's fake, I think also feeds into that, right? Because we get to this last scene, the crux of the whole story, the ending for her. And there's this moment where all of sort of like the veneer falls away, right? And she kind of realizes, I think, all of this stuff I've put so much stock in my entire life that I destroyed my life for, or wanted to run, or hated myself for leaving. It's all fake. It's just all fake. You know, all these people are just players on a stage, you know, and I've kind of given away everything that was real, you know, to try to fit in or try to get away from. And it's all what I've been running away from and running towards is just fake, you know, and I think the movie does really do a good job of giving you that message in the end. And I think it only works because it's set up for everything else happened before. And I kind of didn't really clock until near the end that, you know, all of the private stuff, all the stuff that's like in their bedrooms together, or when they're being actually truthful with each other, is in those back rooms, right? We're not on the stage. We're in the back rooms.
Enclosed settings, right? Whereas the rest of them, as I was saying, you know, when Levin and Steva meet in the restaurant, right? And they create the set around them. I love that moment.
That's so great. Yes. It's so much like a play, right? It's like, the actors sit down and the hands, you know, the crew or like the extras dressed as
they're like the waiters or whatever. And they're just
they're
like
building
the walls around them, and they put the table there, and it's really great.
And the actors are performing while they're dropping the set, which I think is great, right? It's not like it's the set gets dropped and then the scene begins. The scene is going and the set is building around them, right?
That's that pacing, that whip crack, like, no, we're doing this now. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've enclosed you in this thing because now when this thing goes away, there's going to be something totally different on the other side of it than what you left, right? And one of the things in the behind the scenes documentary that I saw was they're talking about, like, you know, you'd wrap a day and you'd be leaving for the day. And as you left, like, a crew would be coming in to completely change what was in the theater from the last day that you were shooting, you know, putting those trees up in the middle of the theater, all that kind of stuff. Like, this stuff that's being done.
Hedge maze. This movie has a great, Shining-esque hedge maze. Wonderful, wonderful set there. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. There are these intimate, I mean, this is a pretty intimate story that, you know, ends up sort of spreading out into the wider world. And we do get these scenes that they're very closed in, right? The bedroom, you know, which a lot of this takes place. But then we also get these isolated sort of outdoor scenes. You know, there's this great moment with Vronsky and Anna, like in a field somewhere on a blanket, you know, where we get this beautiful overhead shot and there's nothing around, you know, there's no walls anywhere. All the stuff with Levin, a really interesting character who like decides to give up all of this, you know, high society life and live out in the middle of nowhere, you know, live in the countryside. All of that, like, that feels like a real location and was shot on a real location. You know, he's plowing the fields with the farm hands or whatever. Yeah. So there is, like, the contrast, I think, is really interesting also. And the movie's kind of doing that all the way through is, you know, the society world versus everything else. You know, the inner world and the outer world.
But I would say there's even a distinction, right, between the Anna and Vronsky outdoor stuff and the Levin outdoor stuff, right?
Yeah, because the Anna and Vronsky stuff is all dreamlike, right?
Yeah,
it's all
very stylized. You know, it's like hyper stylized.
Fairy tale, everything, you know, they're wearing all white. You know, it's overexposed and lots of sunlight. Whereas the Levin stuff is, you know, that sort of almost Terrence Malick-y looking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Also, that's the stuff that most feels like Pride and Prejudice, like, you know, that sort of like opening,
definitely,
you know, sort of earthiness of Pride and Prejudice is the Levin stuff, and I think that. Yeah, it even shows you, like, I think obviously the movie is not subtly, even though they might not say this, is like the way Levin is pursuing his life is the right way to pursue your life, right? That is like, he is free of, you know, all of this, all these peering eyes. He's free of these weird expectations and, you know, everyone having a say in what he does and where he goes and all of this stuff, right?
And when he tries to play in that world, he fails and ends up going back, you know, turning tail, running back to the country, and that's actually the right place to be. So yeah, I think Joe Wright maybe has an affinity for that. Definitely saw that in Pride and Prejudice.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, you know, we can talk about Levin's story. I want to go quickly back to, you know, Anna goes to visit to try to get them to stay together. Kelly MacDonald, by the way, plays.
Oh, she's great too. Yeah, I haven't even mentioned her yet.
Princess
Such a great cast.
I love Kelly MacDonald, and she's very good in this, and, you know, one of the few sort of good people in the entire story, you know, really. And, you know, when she goes back, so she goes to this ball, right? And you mentioned like the sort of like horror movie sort of aspect of it or whatever, but we do this dance, right, with with Vronsky, and this sort of like how sort of everything sort of falls away right around them. And
right, there's like dozens of extras in this scene, and then we get a cut and there's no one there but the two of them. I love it.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because it's not done in that way where it feels like, oh, look at this wonderful dreamlike place we're in. There is a real sense of like foreboding to that moment, right? That the movie is not telling you like, and this is her finding her true love.
No, this is her destroying her life right in this moment. Yep. Yeah, and it is at the score again. Dario Marianelli, who's great at this, worked with Wright numerous times. The way that starts to get distorted and skewed and dissonant, it's a really great scene.
And then one of my favorite shots in the whole movie is we come back. She kind of comes back to herself, right? She realizes what's going on, and she leaves. And she turns around, she looks in the mirror, and the train is coming to them through the mirror.
Which is a transition to the next scene, sure. A lot of stuff with mirrors. There's this great scene that she kind of plays entirely in this very thin mirror in the middle of the frame. She's talking to Karenin, Jude Law, her husband, who she's kind of not been great to. And we only see her in the reflection. I mean, just some incredible staging here.
Yes.
It's Joe Wright guy. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. And obviously he says it's his least showy movie. He's absolutely wrong, but he is right that, no pun intended, for the fact that it does fit more in this movie than any of his other movies, right? The showiness
I think
fits
that's what
here.
he's saying, right? I don't think he's being like defensive about it, but I think it is to like, if we take that inspiration he was talking about, the fact that these people were always kind of putting on a show. Mm-hmm. That definitely fits also. I will say, I mean, there's some very elaborate choreography, but we don't get any tracking shots that go on for 10 minutes here.
No, we don't. We don't.
Nothing like the scene in Hannah. There's nothing like the scene in Atonement. We are cutting a lot, which probably helps with everything that they're trying to do.
Yeah, but I mean, all that stuff we're talking about, the building the sets around them, the transitions, this is where he's using that flair that he just can't, he can't tamper down, which is fine. I think it really works great in this movie. But all that stuff, it's almost like Edgar Wright, Scott Pilgrim stuff, right? Where you're like, you're kind of like going between these two totally different scenes in totally different locations and sort of binding them by some sort of dialogue or thematic element that you're transferring them between.
Or just an emotion, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a moment where Levin leaves the ball where he's just been rejected by what he thinks is the love of his life, actually turns out to be. Mm-hmm. And rather than go out into the street, he goes upstairs, right? Yeah. He goes into the rafters of the theater, which is supposed to be like the poor district of wherever they are, Moscow or St. Petersburg there. Yeah. And it's like, we don't get any sort of transitional. It's just, he is dejected and then he goes out into this dejected place, which is not out to a place, but up the stairs from where he is.
And that's where he meets his brother, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And then, I mean, his transition, right, where he kind of, the back of the theater opens up and it's just like this snowy landscape.
Jaw drop moment. Yeah. Cause I didn't know that, right? Like, I was like, okay, we're going to do this in the theater. Everything's in the theater thing. And then we get this beautiful exterior that the theater opens out onto. I mean, it's an effect that I think works really nicely too.
It works great.
It's some real movie magic there.
And I do think Domhnall Gleeson is great in this. And I think that you immediately get this sense, right? He goes back home. And what is his response to being rejected? Does he do something terrible? Does he get angry? No, he decides like, I need to figure out what my life is supposed to be, right? I'm looking for an answer to.
In this more real way of living.
Yeah.
He sees the artifice of all of it and decides that's not for me.
Yeah, exactly. He kind of walks away from it, right? And when he's petitioned to come back, there's that great scene with him and they fade in like that, like, pub thing where they're kind of like sitting very far apart or whatever, and then maybe he's trying to get him to come back. She's going to be at the house, Blonsky left her, and he's just sort of like, no, like this, I'm not going back to that. Like I tried, I was rejected. I'm not going to be that person who is just like, being a creeper, basically, I'm going to live my life. And I want to figure it out, and even if I'm a little bit sad about it, right? And I think that really works. And I think their scenes are so fun together because they're so incredibly different.
Sure.
Performance-wise and character-wise, and it just works really well when they're in the same room. Because you do get the feeling, though, that like, is it Steva? Is that how you pronounce his name? Steva?
Steva.
cares for him, right? He does care for him. He has affection
you
for
wonder
him.
how they became friends, but they do seem genuinely like friends, even though they're polar opposites.
Yes. And I really like that about their relationship. And I like that these characters, obviously you can tell it's from a epic long novel where there's multiple stories happening at once, because not everyone's dependent on what Anna is doing, right? In fact, his story
is very far distanced from her.
Yes, absolutely. Other than the fact that, the Kitty, the Alicia Vikander character, is, been sort of like another person who's been scorned by Anna because she basically
who's
took
kind
her
of like a
suitor.
mentor figure to her in the beginning. And then kind of steals Vronsky unwittingly, steals him out from under her nose.
Well, I mean, I don't think, by the time it happens, not really unwittingly.
Not completely, right. But there is it's such an interesting character. But again, that's the novel. That's not the movie. But this idea, you've murdered my happiness, right in the middle of a sex scene. Very, very hot sex scene. Very chaste, but very well shot.
Yes.
I put it in the dossier I sent you, the Alliance of Women Film Journalists or something like that. This was nominated for, they nominated for one Anna Award from them that we'll get to, but it was also nominated for Best Portrayal of like sensuality or something like that, a film of that year. And I sort of get that. It's a very sexy movie, but also it's the kind of thing you could probably show on network TV without a problem. Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah, for sure. Yes, absolutely. And I think there's another scene where, she goes back to, again, I'm gonna mix them up. Either she goes back to St. Petersburg or she goes back to Moscow. I don't remember which one it is. And Vronsky kind of follows her back, right? And there's this other ball, right, where like those three princesses are kind of sitting in the middle, sort of holding court.
Emerald Fennell, one of those.
Emerald Fennell is one of them. Yeah. And you're like, okay,
I supporting role in this movie.
Very much feels like a movie Emerald Fennell might direct, except it would be a little much more lewd, probably.
Yeah, you probably couldn't show hers on network TV. Yeah,
no. But it's her and Ruth Wilson and Michelle Dockery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
fake Kate Blanchett from Hannah are
Star
all here.
Risk.
What?
Star Flight Risk.
Star Flight Risk. Yes, absolutely. And this this is one of those scenes where we really get to see the artifice and fakeness and just shallowness of this whole society, right? That they're all sort of playing a part, and it is much more important to play your part than it is to do anything real, right? It's just about keeping up the order and keeping up, these are the people you say hello to. You don't say hello to the wrong person. You don't talk to the person. You can't
associate with someone that has sullied themselves the way Anna has. Sure.
Yeah.
And even though she hasn't really done it yet, even in this moment, there's a lot of tension in this scene, right? Because just her like being in the same room as Vronsky is kind of a problem.
Right. And this is the moment where, it breaks, right? Because up until this point, really it's been Vronsky who's been taking most of the brunt of the shame part of it, right? Because he's kind of doggedly chasing her,
lusting after a married woman, married to someone important.
Yes, and she's sort of been ignoring him, even though we know that she's interested and attracted and wants to be near him. She is, still putting up the front, doing her own sort of fakery to keep the appearance that everything is okay. And in this scene, basically it's the Ruth Wilson character, right, who's related to him or is friends with him or whatever, and she's kind of like, you gotta go, like, you're being a complete loser, like, get out of here, and
then her husband shows up.
Yeah, her husband shows up. And Michelle Dockery tries her best to help her. I gotta say, she's being quite nice. She's trying to stop.
Let's take a walk over here and check out this thing. Right. Yeah. It's, it's very romantic comedy sort of.
Yeah. And she's just completely oblivious to it.
Yeah.
And then, we get right around here is when they actually, consummate their relationship for the first time. And
kind of and that's another thing I really like, because there's kind of an ellipses there, right? You get this very tense moment. Mm-hmm. Her husband kind of like, after they see each other, her and Vronsky see each other at this ball, and clearly there's something going on there. He says, well, I didn't see anything, but there are rumors. They're talking about you and him. And, she kind of like, tries to laugh it off and tries to just dismiss the whole thing. And then it's like the next scene, they're like meeting each other in secret and consummating the relationship.
Yeah.
I liked that choice too.
Absolutely. And I like it this whole time, the Jude Law character sort of like, do you have something to tell me? Like, is something going on? And she's like, no, don't be crazy. I'm your wife. Or whatever. And you can tell, like, he kind of knows that she's lying, but doesn't want to believe that she's lying.
My wife is beyond reproach, he says.
Yeah. Even though
she couldn't have done it because she's my wife, and because she's my wife, she's beyond reproach.
Yeah.
Which tells you a little bit about him.
Until we get to the race scene you mentioned before, which is obviously an astoundingly staged scene where you have
gorgeous.
It's like a horse race going on this stage, and at one point, again, I just love the theatricality of this because it could have been this crazy big, you build yourself a horse, old timey looking horse racing track.
Her, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You get this is an action scene, and they don't do it that way at all.
Yeah,
I love. There's this great, just this moment of sound editing. She's got a fan, and she's fanning herself.
Yeah.
And her husband is looking at her, and she's getting the intensity of that is building up, and it is the sound of the horse's hooves. It's great.
Yeah, and then
Vronsky's
horse falls off the stage, and she like freaks the fuck out. Right.
Oh, Jude Law's so good in this scene.
Yeah, he is. He's astounding in this scene. And he's like, I'm right here.
I'm
right
here.
I'm here.
And she like pushes him away.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, I think not knowing the story, not knowing these characters, I always was waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? Where he was going to do something or behave in a way that was really terrible and disgusting, right? And like, you're my property and you're going to do what I say, right? And there just never is a moment like that with him. He is like, listen, so the next scene, Vronsky has to kill the horse that falls off the stage. Again, I love this because it's like everything is so tight and small and packed in. And it's like, it's really giving you this idea of like everybody is listening and looking and seeing what you're going to do.
Great bit in the mirror. She's looking in her like makeup compact mirror and he's right there. Her husband is right there behind her. She like snaps it shut.
Yeah. And like, you have to, if you were picturing this in reality, it's probably a giant place, right? Sure. But because we're packed into this little theater, you really get this idea of like, no, one thing that happens, it just spreads, right? And so you might as well be in a little room because even the thing where one point, they're just all staring at her. Like everybody in the theater is like staring at her. And the next scene in this carriage,
what a great scene too.
Where he's like, so you're going to tell me that everything is okay and whatever. And she comes clean, right? She's honest with him about what's going on. And, he says, you can never see her. You can never see him again. And we got another one of these great transitions where she like goes out of the carriage. And then she's like, just like in this,
runs off into this like geometric, I think it's the hedge maze. I think it's like part of the hedge maze set where you get these like square bushes. Mm-hmm. It's almost like Last Year in Marienbad or something like that. And she like runs off into the backdrop, which is very much a backdrop. I really like that moment.
And it just transitions right into it. And you kind of get the next scene. And again, we're talking about the pacing of this thing. In a traditional version of this story, we've got more of this carriage ride. We've got she's got
more of her running away. Yeah.
She's got to sneak off at night or whatever, whatever is going to happen, and, all this kind of stuff. And instead we just get to the meat of what is going on in the story. And then the next scene where she goes back home to kind of tell Jude Law's character, I'm done. Like we're done or whatever. I think that scene, Jude Law is unbelievably good in that scene. It's just like,
is this the one that ends with him by himself on the stage in the empty, like by the footlights of this? Oh God, I love that shot.
It's amazing.
And it is, you're right. Like I did expect some more fireworks out of that character. And instead it's just this moment of like pure rejection.
Yeah.
And he plays that, this like handsome marquee movie star idol guy, approaching middle age at this point when this movie was made, as you were saying, and just kind of seeing him in that moment was, it's so painful. And the way it's like that brilliant shot where the lights go down on him in this empty theater and Anna's not in the shot.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. I wasn't expecting to sympathize with that character at all after that point. Like, because you want her to get away. You want her to live this life that is a complicated story, as we've been saying. Yeah. And this is one of those moments where you realize that it really is, very, very multidimensional.
Yeah. And she's got to leave her kid. Like she has a son. We haven't even said that.
Son who's 7-8 years old.
Yeah. And she's got to leave him. And she's also pregnant at this point. And that's kind of what kind of just breaks him of it, right? He's just sort of like, okay, and he kind of walks away, right? And, what I love here is we get this space of time where we get to spend more time with Levin, where we see him working in the fields, and it's this gorgeous...
Right, well, we got to get away from Anna and Karenina at this point because it's just too painful.
Yeah,
so we need to just do something else for a while.
he's working in the fields. And, you know, at first I'm like, this is like, I was like, did something happen? Like, did something happen? Is he now poor or whatever? And he works in the fields because he, you know, he says
man, he's a man of the people, right?
Yeah.
He gets right down there and swings the scythe with his farm hands.
And he says, like, you know,
that grounds him. Yeah.
The men don't like me for it, you know, and he's kind of like, why do you do it? And it goes, you know, it stops me from, you know, thinking about why I'm here, or, you know, whatever, you know, which is just a very real.
Well, it's a great moment. I don't know who the actor is, but, you know, whoever, you know, his chief, you know, farmhand or whatever. And Levin says to him, you know, like, my father worked you all to death. And like, yeah, but this is what we wanted. Like, this was, you know, it's this very regimented life, right? Like, you are this thing or you are this thing, and you just get used to that. And he sees this young man, I think it's the guy's son, with a woman, and they look kind of miserable. They're sitting by the fire. It's clearly been a long day of work. And he's like, I've never been that happy in my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you know, maybe there is something to be said for being poor and working for someone else and not having to worry about, you know, what society thinks of you. And that's an interesting theme that kind of runs through this also.
Yeah. And he says, like, is that what I'm looking for? To live simply or whatever, I think, or whatever it is.
He's a hippie a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And he falls asleep on top of this hay bale. And
it's a great shot.
It's a great shot. And he wakes up and there's a carriage going by and Kitty is in the carriage. And in that moment, he realizes, like, I still want this, right? You combine with that moment we had before, right? It's like, if I can have that life with her here, that could be something, right?
Right.
But in order to do
she,
that,
at this point, after being rejected by Vronsky for Anna, has also become kind of just jaded and cynical about love, and she thinks she's going to be an old maid or something. And we see her with a baby early, like, I'm never going to have one of these, and has kind of resigned herself to that. And like this whole like this is a really nice story that's going on in parallel to the other one that's just going straight to hell, you know, and wherever they are. And it's the way we kind of, like, the second half of the movie kind of juxtaposes those two things. I think is really interesting also.
Yeah, absolutely. And he kind of re-enters society for one last sort of try, right? He goes to
the alphabet block scene.
Yes.
You know what? I love this movie.
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah,
that might be my favorite scene in the whole movie.
It's great. Yep.
It's romantic. It's as all hell, and I loved it. I don't know if it's exactly like that in the book. I don't know if this is
that feels like an invention.
Movie invention,
that feels
you know?
like Joe Wright, like just the way that,
or a Tom Stoppard invention, you know, who knows?
Sure, or Tom Stoppard, but like the way, the pacing of it, it's like the slowest paced scene in the movie, and you're just like waiting to see it, and they've already established that, you know, visually earlier on. Anna does something, you know, those blocks.
Yeah.
I really do like that moment a lot too.
And they're sort of working through their past with these blocks, right?
Yeah. Like, you can't come out and say it, but maybe if we just spell it out on the table here.
And these unanswered questions, right, that they kind of both have, but especially he has, about the fact that, like, look, I came to you, I asked you, and you said no. So is that no forever, or is that was just no then? You know, and this idea of, like, her being like, I didn't realize then, you know, what was important, right? Just like he didn't really know at that point what was important. And now they've found each other again. And
I was so young. He's like, it was a few months ago.
Yeah, I know. All those months ago. They're both so charming in this scene together. She's luminous in it. You can tell immediately why it was only it would be a year or two later that she would, you know, be in a ton of stuff and be nominated for Oscars and all this kind of stuff and win an Oscar, right? But it's just a really beautiful, kind scene. And again, once again, you know, Matthew McFadden's character just hovering around, like looking in, trying to see if everything's going right. You know, he cares if these people get together or not. And I really like that about it.
But still has one eye on the governesses.
Yeah, exactly.
That's his thing.
yeah. 100%. You know, and, you know, we get this, we now all of a sudden we kind of go back to, you know, our main storyline, and we learn that Anna is sick, right? And again, so theatrical. You could definitely see, you're sitting there in the theater, right? And you've got, you know, Karenina on one side, and all of a sudden there's like a single light comes on, and she's laying in bed, and she's like, Alexei, come back. You know, you can feel it, right? And again, in these great merging of scenes, like, how long has it been? We don't know. At least 9 months, right? Probably.
Sure, yeah.
But
right,
who knows?
The baby is born at that point, right?
Baby's
like
born.
In the room with them? Okay, I thought so.
Yeah, the baby is born, yes. We have this other scene, right, where, you know, they kind of pass each other in the hall before this happens, where he's leaving and
love that again through not a mirror, but like it looks like a mirror, right? At this thin glass window, and they kind of like lock eyes a little bit.
Yeah.
What happens with the two of them is unexpected, right?
Absolutely,
This moment where they're holding hands over her when she's sick in bed.
Yeah. Yeah. But I want to rewind to that scene I'm talking about really quick where they pass each other, because that is the first moment where Anna says a thing. She's like, she kind of lashes out at Vronsky, and then she calls it like her demon, right? Or whatever she says. And it's this thing that she just really does have this self-destructive streak to her personality and this mean nastiness to her, at times as well. And, she obviously is constantly fighting that and against that and trying to figure out if she's a good person or not. Because there's a lot in this where she's like, I'm a terrible woman. I'm a terrible person. And then in the next scene, she'll just be outright terrible. Like she just hasn't, she has this problem with this self-awareness that doesn't help her learn anything. Right. Which I think is her tragic
how much
flaw.
is what she's doing just lashing out at this guy, this very boring man that she's married to, who's very good to her and has kind of committed himself to taking care of her, but also is kind of a, absentee father and seems like no fun at all.
No, he doesn't seem like he's any fun. He definitely seems like he's kind of a square. Time for bed. It's just that's also what he says in the beginning of the first half of the movie. But I think, again, and I think this movie is playing with this a lot, right? Like this idea of like love and what is love? What is love, right? Is love what, Levin has, or is love what Vronsky and Anna have?
Is it two sexy young people, or is it like someone who's going to take care of you for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
Because Vronsky is also, while he's with Anna, do you love only me? No.
Yeah.
And like, even when they are together later in the film, clearly he's running around on her and she kind of knows it.
Is, you know?
And I think he is too.
Yeah. But again, I think at least the movie version is definitely playing with this idea of like,
right.
You've seen her mental state degrade. She has some sort of illness as well. Like what is going on? But so she calls back Alexei. She's like, what do you think is on her deathbed? And he said, we had this kind of unexpected sort of beautiful moment to Alexei and Vronsky where he's like, you should go now. If she calls for you, I promise you, I will let you come back. Right. Like I'm not putting up a barrier here between the two of you, but you need to leave now. Right. You're like, this is not she wanted me back here. So you need to leave. We both can't be like living in this house together. That's not going to happen. But then as soon as she's better, right, that nastiness comes back. And he says, like, you begged me to come back. You begged me to be here. She's like, that's when I thought I was going to die. And now that I'm not going to die, I can't live with myself being here, and I love him that moment too.
Such wild swings that these characters are making, and that's in Tolstoy, right? And that's got to be part of the story. Yeah. But the two of them play it so naturalistically, and it's not, you couldn't imagine real people kind of having these wild, I love this person, I don't love this person, I need this person, I don't really need this person, and yet you kind of buy it when it's these actors, and it's Joe Wright directing them.
Absolutely, and I think I love Jude Law in that scene too because he just really nothing about it. When he tries to dissuade her from leaving, right? None of it is about him, right? He's not saying like, I'm going to be ashamed. I'm going to lose my station. He just says like, if you do this, if you get divorced, you will be the wrong party. Your marriage will not be, valid basically anywhere.
And your daughter with someone who's not me, like she won't have my name and I can't do anything.
She'll lose all her protections. Of mine. And that's it. Like, your life is going to be ruined. And she's, I think doesn't even want to admit that he's right. I don't think she even thinks about it at that moment. She's like, we'll be fine. Our love will be enough, right? She has that sort of like message to him. And we quickly learn that is not true, right? Once they are together and there's nothing in between them anymore, it like falls apart very, very, very fast. Like they are at each other's throats. You cannot tell sometimes, like, again, I think I like the movie for this. Is she just being paranoid? Is she just being overly critical? Or is he really doing all this stuff, right? Is all this stuff really happening? But you do know for real that all this stuff in society is really happening because when they show her going back out into the world, it is terrible. It is a terrible life.
Well, and it's especially terrible because she goes into it so confidently, right?
Yes.
Like I'm going to go out to the opera or
Mhm.
whatever, and I know everyone's going to be there, and I'm just going to show my face. And she's like, I can do this. And as soon as she gets there, it's just like a nightmare, like from second one, and it just deteriorates more and more from there. And there's a female character in this. She's like a few seats down with her husband,
Mhm.
and the husband like does something nice for Anna, and she gets so indignant about it, like, you can't even look at this woman, she's like worse than the lowest crap in the entire world. And I don't know who the actress is, but it's so like she's just seething, and it's great.
I think that the actress who's playing that woman played Moaning Myrtle in the Harry Potter movies.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I'm going to look it up right now because I was watching it, and I was rewatching some of those scenes today.
Famously, they cast like every British actor. Like, it's not that big of a play. It's an island, so they only have so many to work with.
Exactly, and they were only allowed to cast
a
British
big
actors.
cast. Yep. Yeah.
So, but
I believe that.
And after she talked to him, after he talks to her, right? The woman makes that noise, and then once again, everybody is staring. Right, everybody's just staring, and Vronsky won't come. He says he's like, you can't go there, right? And she's like, I'm gonna go, and it turns out, like you said, really, really terrible. And you get that moment in like a scene or two later where Kelly Macdonald is actually very nice to her, and you can tell she's just sort of like doesn't know what to do with it. That this woman is being so nice to her, and when she hears about Kitty and Levin getting together and having a baby, and she goes like, I'm sorry, I can't have you at the house right now. And she's like, oh, I understand. She's like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is not because like it would be socially, a social faux pas for me. It's because the person who probably hates you most in the world is at my house right now, but really, a really interesting scene. You can just see it really breaking down for her, right? It's like all beginning to just completely fall apart for her in that moment. And the outside pressure, you can see it leak into their lives, because those scenes, we start to get these scenes that sort of like obviously take place over probably weeks or months.
These like fraught domestic scenes between her and Vronsky, like this great love that's supposed to solve everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see it all just breaking apart. Like this scene, like, she's drinking a ton, and,
every time he leaves the house, she thinks he's running away.
Yeah. And even when they have sex, it's like, now it's like very like mechanical and not romantic anymore. It's, she's like, oh, I can't sleep. And he's like, I know what can make you sleep. And then it's just not this passionate, wonderful, overexposed, dreamy thing anymore. Now there's like a darkness to it that, she can't really fend off anymore. We get that scene where he comes home and she's wearing like just like the shaping of the dress or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the skeletal, I don't know what you call that. Yeah.
And that scene is, I think, great, and I think they're both very good in it. And one of these scenes is the one where she's like, well, I want to go away. I want to go to the country. I think it's the scene before that. And he's like, okay, we can't leave on Sunday because I gotta go see my mom. And she's like, well, then you don't love me. She like runs away. And then we get this scene next to it. And then, basically it's over for her at this point, right? We get that great scene, the quote I said at the beginning where, I think it's Vronsky, asking, one of the people at the opera to come over, or to call on her. And, he says, like, it's not like she broke the law. And he goes, if she just broke the law, I would call on her. She broke the rules.
Even his own brother at this point won't, he'll see him in public. But yeah, you can't go to this like den of sin, which is just his apartment that he has with Anna.
Yeah. And, she dresses in this like, kind of purplish, maroonish gown with this veil. And she's walking through this, this apartment or whatever. And, she sits down on that, like, she kind of gets like stomach pain. She sits back on this backing. And I'm like, this kind of looks like a train, like, seat. And then she pulls the window shade open and she's on the train.
Yes.
And I was like,
and And that's the first thing, right? But it's been a while since we've seen something like that in this movie, right?
Yeah.
Like it does. The first half does so much of that, and then it really does. It scales it back. When the story gets more dramatic, more emotional, and much darker, that opera scene, pretty because they're in a theater, right? It looks like the opera. It doesn't look like a set. We're not, doing all that thing, manipulating the scenery like we were before. We're not shooting all those mirrors and everything. So yeah, that moment is kind of surprising because we haven't really seen much of that in a while. And there are moments of this, particularly toward the end, where it kind of just feels like a standard traditional adaptation. The stuff with Levin, because that's been doing that the whole time. And we see kind of the resolution of that story at this point also. We're not doing the theatrical thing as much. I mean, it's still, we still don't have like establishing jumps. She wouldn't need them. Any movie would be done with that at this point anyway. Yeah. So it does.
Though I'd say the ending is majorly theatrical.
Oh,
like
sure.
Anna's ending is majorly theatrical.
Anna's ending, and then that closing shot, which we'll get to.
But the last bits of the Levin part, I should say, he brings Kitty home, and his brother is there, and he's sick, and his sort of, I think she's like she's his girlfriend or wife or whatever, but she's
a woman of low standing. She's a prostitute.
She's a prostitute, raised prostitute, right? Yeah,
right.
And he's like, you can't be here. What are you doing? Like,
so just her existence in this world is an issue.
Yeah, and because he's worried because he still has a little bit of that. This woman who I love is coming from society. She's not going to want to be here. Like, and Kitty has no problem, right? She's like, where is he? I'm going to go, and she goes and starts taking care of him. She does not kick that woman out. You can definitely see, right, this drastic difference, right, between where they are and what they have between what the other people have, right? And
I love Domhnall Gleeson in this moment, just watching her, wash this guy, whatever they're doing with him, being a nurse to him, essentially, with his wife, who she's not even supposed to share a room with or share a house with. And yet here she is. And just the look of adoration on his face there. It's really great.
With that other older woman who looks like she's like would be on a card of like death, a tarot card of death, who's like standing behind her. But, and I think in that Kelly Macdonald scene as well, right, we get the other end of this, which is she says to Anna, right, that he's exactly the same. He's screwing around, Stiva is screwing around. And, I wish I had done what you had done, but nobody asked me, and I wouldn't have the bravery to do it anyway. And that's one moment of hope, right, for Anna in that moment, right? Did I actually make the right choice? And then when it falls apart, with Vronsky, where he ends up, going with, the child, as she calls her. And again, but the movie's still having like, is she just really coming there to drop off some documents, and she is like just assumed all of this terrible stuff because she herself has done terrible stuff, so she assumes the worst in everyone.
She's looking at it's a typical, domestic drama scene. She sees him getting to the carriage with her, and it could be anything, but we have our suspicions. I have my suspicions, as I said before.
We see him in the mirror, right? Again, we get that one scene where you think she's not talking to anybody, and then all of a sudden he's there, like in the mirror, and he's, he's just chopping up there. And then when she's on the train, she sees them having sex with each other.
Imagines it, right? In the window. It's a great framing there also.
Yeah. And then we get this scene with Levin where he comes home and he says to Kitty, I've realized something. And she goes, what have you realized? And then we never hear what it is, right? You can kind of, probably surmise, you can probably guess what he's going to say. But I love that they leave that sort of just sitting there, right?
Lost in translation.
Yeah, exactly. And then we get the end, we get Anna's end, right? Which is, we talked about a little bit before, but she's on the train, she's getting off the train. And at first, we're on the train, and the people who have, again, it always feel like extras, it always feel like people who are in a scene, but now they're like frozen, just like staring at her.
That's a tableau, yeah.
Yeah. And she's sort of walking through it. And when she walks out of the train, she's in the rafters or, of the theater. And, there are just ropes and all the stagecraft stuff around.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And these people are just, just staring, frozen, right? And this is the point where I think she's starting to realize, like, her whole life is starting to break down in front of her eyes, right? Like, this, what is this? What am I doing? What's going on? What have I done? And she sits and she sees that kid, right? Who I don't think is supposed to be like her kid, but definitely she's sitting, all of a sudden she's on that bench or she's sitting down now and she has this look of just like abject, kind of horror on her face where she's realizing all this stuff. And then she throws herself in front of the train and she says, "I'm sorry," or "Forgive me."
God forgive me.
God forgive me. And throws herself in the train. And you see the train hit her, which I was not really expecting to see.
Yes, and earlier in the film, we did see someone cut in half,
we did,
intestines spilling out. I guess you can't show this entirely on network television. It was a brutal moment that I wasn't expecting. But not knowing the story, I just knew something was going to happen with her on a train later on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's shocking, but it's not shocking. It's inevitable in some way. And we've seen, this train imagery throughout the film, right? Like this train barreling toward the camera so many times, and that moment early on we were talking about where she's looking at the ball there and we see the reflection of it in the mirror kind of comes to fruition here, maybe a little on the nose. Once you see it actually happen in the reality of the film now, it's okay, this is what we were seeing before then. But
this train, because this idea, right, this train has always been coming, right? That's the idea, right? The train has always been coming. Once she made the decision she made, this was the ending. There was no This was the tragic ending. There was no way to escape it, because either with the mix of who she is as a person and also the way just life and society are, there was no good ending for this, right? It was always going to end in something like this. One by one, the people who cared about her or said they cared about her fell away, and there was just nobody left. By the time you get to that end moment, there is nobody left for her, to even go to anymore. And then we get that last scene of Jude Law, sitting in the field.
I love this scene so much, right?
This like
overgrown field that then becomes the audience space in the theater. And the camera is just sort of dollying back slowly.
Yeah.
Really, really perfect way to end this version of this story.
So let me ask you, the second child who is there, is that her daughter with Vronsky?
I thought so, yeah. Who else could she be, right?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know, unless he's remarried and had another kid or something, I don't know.
But I feel like they would have set that up. No, like age-wise, that would make sense, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we don't know how far after her death this is, but
we don't know.
We also don't know how long she lived.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that was my assumption, that he had kind of taken this little girl under his wing, and he's just sort of sitting there reading a book, and he like looks at them wistfully for a second, and he's like, nope, back to reading.
Reading again.
Which is him.
But still, again, another thing where I'm like, if that's the case, this guy really is a mensch, because they didn't have to do that, that's not something they didn't have to do. And, I think there's also...
He could have always said it was his biological daughter. It's not like they could have DNA tested her.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. He just was like, she's mine, right? But he could have also said she's not mine,
Sure, but that is my guess to what happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he sort of redeems himself there.
Yeah, I don't think he ever irredeems himself.
No. But I mean, it's like, at least for us, right? For the audience who loves Keira Knightley and wants this character to, have a life, and not be bound by these rules. We do sort of hate Karenin through a lot of this, and I think he, in the end,
speak for yourself, man. I never hated him. I never
liked him.
I actually liked him quite a bit. That's the funny thing. I think like he represents something, obviously, which is not good, right? Like this
controlling thing that he does. Yes. Maybe I'm looking at it for too modern of an eye, but I mean, he's the way he sort of, he treats women as property, kind of like Steva does it in a different way, but I don't know.
I don't think it's like, I don't get, you think in the movie, the text of the movie, he treats her like property?
No, like she's a property as so much as like a function, like something, it's like part of his job, like a cabinet, a department he's supposed to run or something like that. You know what I mean?
I get that for sure. Yeah, there's definitely, look, I think the marriage itself is obviously, it's a marriage of, arrangement or convenience. It's not a love marriage, right? That's just not what it is, right?
Well, she's like a necessary responsibility and something that's going to help him be this person in government that he has.
I don't disagree with you, but I do feel like you get the sense that he genuinely has affection for her, in his own weird sort of like erudite way.
Right. I don't think he gets a sense he doesn't love the way other characters in this movie like
no, and that's what I mean exactly. But I would also say, like, I don't think the movie is saying like or the story is saying
he's
like
never a bad guy.
Right. No, but I also think only the story is like, and what she was doing with Vronsky was the right course of action.
No,
you know what I mean?
No, of course not.
And like, I think, I guess for me, the whole time I'm just like, I'm like, this is going to end terribly for you no matter what happens here, and I think, I think that's why I think she's an interesting character, because it's a great performance and the character is complicated and fascinating. And that's what makes her someone you want to sort of follow and learn about and travel on this journey with. But I don't think that she's incredibly likable. I'm not sitting there cheering for her and Vronsky when they're together.
No, I agree.
You know what? Sorry, I missed what you said.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's, even in that moment, right? Like, this is, you've murdered my happiness. I think that's what really it is about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And she says things that I think make sense when she goes like, when she talks about how her son will forgive her eventually when he learns about love, but wouldn't forgive her if, she stayed somewhere where she was unhappy or whatever. That's the kind of vibe she's giving on that, but obviously some of what she says and a lot of what she says is kind of bullshit, right? She's kind of just making up
justifying
things, right? Because her son obviously will not forgive her, considering what she did, in the end of the whole thing.
Right.
So,
yeah,
I don't think it's someone who's trying to make it about, someone else's well-being. And she claims to, love her child and he's her world, but obviously that's not true. You know what I mean? And I think,
do we ever see her with the daughter together?
No, we don't.
Because I didn't think so. I was trying to think back, and we do. There's some nice moments. There's a great bit. Joe Wright does this all the time, right? It's her and her older sister in bed under the sheet.
Mm-hmm.
These like very private, intimate moments between family members, and we've seen that in his other movies. And there's a great bit with her and her son earlier in the film. Mm-hmm. So there is a connection there. But when she has this baby, it's always like off on the left side of the frame
with the nurse or
I don't think we ever even get a close up. We never even see what the baby looks like.
No, we don't.
Which definitely is telling.
And really, once Vronsky is part of the equation, she forgets about all of that stuff, right? There's not really, other than say goodbye to her son, there's not really
there's like one last sort of nice mother-son scene there, but it's also kind of fraught too.
Yeah. And I love in that scene where
she talks about him, but she
talks about him all the time. But that's what I mean. Yeah. She's all talk. That's what I think is so fascinating about her, right? And I think that scene between the two of them when she's, when Ruth Wilson is there and she's, talking about how like, Vronsky wants to see her and all this stuff. And, she's, I don't want to keep anything from you. He wants to come see you. And I told him no. And, Lexi tries to talk about it with her. She's like screaming, right? And she says that thing where she's like, you said you didn't want to see him again. She's like, not to say goodbye. Right. And the way they played that scene and the hurt between the two of them is just, it's so well acted between them. It is really fascinating, like you said, how, 10 years before this, maybe not even 10 years before this, 5 years before this, whatever, Jude Law is definitely playing Vronsky in this moment, and
they put him in these very tiny glasses.
They do.
In that
they
moment
give him little tiny glasses and they give him like a ball. They make him very bald, they give him like balding and stuff like that. I thought this movie was great. And I think.
Agreed.
I think it's actually
agreed, and I think whatever reservations I had about it, I think I've kind of
talked them out.
Yeah, I think I have. That's what I do on this show, right? I talk through my feelings, I work things out, and I think I did. This is 4 stars for me.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and I think one of those movies where I could definitely say to certain people, like you said, this is a movie that you should watch, right? Because I think people who appreciate this sort of oddball storytelling, who still enjoy classical stories. I think you do have to enjoy classical stories still to really get into this, because you need to be willing to accept some of the non-modern conventions of
right.
Of
it's another place, another time, and it's not. They're not trying to modernize it, right? Like this is not a movie about the world of 2012.
Yes, and it's also not a movie like Pride and Prejudice, where it's about a character specifically who's trying to break past in ways that are inspiring the societal constraints that exist at the time, right? It's not Pride and Prejudice is not Little Women.
She ends up being a victim of that, whereas Pride and Prejudice is a story about like pushing things forward.
Right, is pushing things forward. And this is about someone who, again, I think it's also who's writing it, right? Leo Tolstoy is not a woman, so he's not really the story is the time when you're writing that he wrote this to be about like this adulterous woman who really wronged this good man, right? And then while writing the book, he started like kind of fell in love with the character. And so that's why the character became more complicated and more interesting.
See, that's interesting too, because and I don't remember where I read this or heard this, but like Anna Karenina is like, I've always heard it like connected with feminism and feminist literature. And like, if you take a feminist lit class, like this is, week 1 or something like that. And yeah, I mean, I guess I can sort of see that there, but also it's very much in its time and its place. This is not we're not talking about the 60s to 70s,
no.
or now.
But it is about a woman who just for pursuing what she wanted.
Right. Is persecuted
her life ended,
and
basically, that's what happens. Her life ends.
Her tragic flaw is just pursuing what she wants.
Yeah, and having the selfishness and the thing that men have all the time, right? All these men have it, right? You look at Steva,
right? Yeah,
he's way worse, but he gets to be royalty and sleep with as many women as he wants, and just keep coming back to, as long as he doesn't divorce his wife or get divorced from, everything's fine, right? And
yeah, actually, he gets a pretty happy ending in this too. We never really see him again, so he's probably just going to keep doing what he's doing.
Yeah, he's just going to be a rich guy until he dies, And I think, I think there is whether Tolstoy is intentionally drawing those parallels or not, or it just so happens that because of he's actually writing a character who is female, who's driving towards something that she wants and is being punished for it, right? And just happens to be other male characters just acting like male characters the day around her. You can draw those parallels, but
and they have some of the same desires, right? They're brother and sister.
Yeah,
so
they are. They're
alike in some sense.
He's like,
right? There's also
family
interesting parallels, right? Like both Vronsky and Karenin, their first name is Alexei.
Yes. Yep. That's right. That's absolutely
right.
Which
makes things hard to follow, but also adds like other dimensions to the story.
That's pretty much why they only call him Vronsky, and they never call him Alexei for the most part.
A couple of times, yeah. And it's very, because you keep forgetting that there is someone, anyway.
Yes.
It's a complicated story.
Complicated story, lots of names. Tolstoy was very big on doing stories about class and everything like that. So this is obviously not a far stretch, for that sort of literature, but yeah, it does feel like a piece with Pride and Prejudice in some ways, right? Even though that is a much more hopeful, sort of nicely romantic story and not a deeply tragic romantic
it's like
story.
We see Keira Knightley kind of grow up over the course of these Joe Wright movies.
Yes.
And, where she ends up here as compared to the first one is kind of a sad place.
Yes. But I will say it's nice because we talk about this when we talk about atonement. She got so stuck for a while just playing like sad, pretty girl, that, and even in Atonement, she ends up being that by the end of the movie, right? And it's like, in this at least, she has a real force and fierceness behind her in her performance and in the character. Much like Pride and Prejudice, but just totally different.
There's lightheartedness in this movie too, which I think, makes the tragedy work that much more. But like the first half of this, she is witty and fun and,
absolutely.
Romantic and sexy. And like, you do get that. It's not all, a downer.
Well,
and
you can
like
see why Vronsky would fall for her, right? That set up very much so.
Yeah, she's more charming than all these like pretty girls. That's his thing. Is the young, pretty rich women. But she's that plus whatever else. She's got charisma and she seems smarter than I think she's the smartest character in this movie.
Yeah, and McFadden says like he has nothing better to do than like drink and sleep with beautiful women or whatever he says about Vronsky in that scene. And like the opening scene where first scene where Levin comes to visit, comes to visit Steva. Is great. Like when they're in like his kind of like counting house or whatever, they're walking around. And I was listening and I was like, are they about to go into like a musical number right now? Because that's really what it felt like. Because he was like, this is
the atonement score. Yeah, they're stamping the papers.
Yeah, he's like, boom, boom. He's like, this is my friend, Levin, whatever. And then like, and I was like, is he going to break into a musical right now? And I was like, you know what? Why hasn't Joe Wright directed a musical? It seems like the perfect thing for him to direct a musical.
Yeah.
Some sort of retelling of some sort of classic Rodgers and Hammerstein or something, or Gilbert and Sullivan musical or something. It seems like
I don't know. It's got to be something mannered, a period piece.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
something Gershwin. I don't know, but it just feels like it'd be perfect. Like the Pirates of Penzance is definitely. But I
do you really want to see that movie though?
I don't know, not really. No. But I would watch a Joe Wright musical.
The costumes would be fantastic.
The costumes would be amazing, and he would do crazy choreography. I guarantee you that for sure. But yeah, this was a big win for me.
Yeah.
I think.
I would say, how many movies have we covered on the show this far? Like, this is top 3 for me, at least.
How many have we covered? Is this our 5th, Joe Wright? Right. So we did Pride and Prejudice, Atonement. It's 5th because it's Pride and Prejudice, Atonement, Soloist,
Hannah. Yeah,
Hannah.
I blocked out a lot of the soloists. So
there's 5 Afflecks, right? So that's
5
10.
Afflecks, 5 Kusama, and 5 Kaczynski. So 20 movies.
20 movies. Yeah.
Wow. We've been at this for kind of a while.
Yeah.
Go us.
20 movies.
Yeah, I will say out of those 20 movies, this is definitely one of the best. Just in general, like, and not only in terms of how good it is, but also how much I enjoyed it, which I went into it kind of very low expectations and really liked it a lot.
Yeah. Definitely in competition for me for his best. I mean, I adored Pride and Prejudice. So Pride and Prejudice it's pretty much I think close to Pride and Prejudice for me. They're probably on the level for me as I think his 2 best. So yeah, I'm just now I'm worried because I know next week we're talking about Pan.
We've got Pan, we've got Cyrano, and what else?
We got Darkest Hour, which Darkest Hour I'm kind of looking forward to.
Me too.
Because I have a feeling that it won't be boring. Considering what we've seen him do with these other movies. I have a feeling like even though it again seems like it's a standard biopic sort of thing, that every time he's had something like that, he really has sort of done something different. We've got Pan, Gary Oldman's great. Pan, The Darkest Hour, The Woman in the Window, and Cyrano.
I keep forgetting about that one too.
I know.
This is the longest filmography we've covered thus far.
It's true, and he's got a new movie in development. He directed an episode of Black Mirror. Nosedive, season 3. I don't know what that one is.
I never remember the episode titles. But yeah, up through about season 4, that show was pretty solid all the way through.
Yeah, totally. Nosedive, Black Mirror. Wow, it's the one with
not the Bryce Dallas Howard.
Dallas Howard one. Yeah, the social media one.
Oh, that's like the most famous episode of that show. I didn't know he made that.
That's not the most famous episode of that show.
Well, that one and the
San Junipero is probably the most famous episode of that show.
But no, that's just the best episode of that show.
You think that? Okay. We'll talk about that. Are you talking San Junipero or Nosedive is the best episode?
San Junipero.
Oh, that's really good. But like, we don't have to go to a whole Black Mirror discussion. I think that episode is
another show.
Fantastic and wonderful. But I like the darker stuff a little bit more.
I do too. That's why that one kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah,
I liked it so much. But yeah, but Nosedive is like, if you wanted someone to watch that show and like, here's the thing that's kind of like what's happening now, I think that's a good jumping in point.
Yeah, the dark version of the Meow Meow Beans community episode. I think my favorite episode of Black Mirror is White Christmas.
White Christmas is great, yeah.
That one, oh my God, such a depressing ending. That's such a depressing. And that has Rafe Spall. It has another son of a famous UK character actor.
Yeah, somebody who'll be in a Joe Wright movie at some point.
Oh, I can't believe he hasn't been in one.
Yeah. You haven't seen any Spalls yet, right?
No Spalls yet. No Spalls yet.
Maybe
one day.
Maybe later. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I'll say this. They dropped when we're recording this, just a couple days ago, they dropped the full F1 trailer.
Yeah, that'll be our first like live seeing this in the theater discussion on the show. I haven't seen it yet, and I kind of don't want to. Like, I'm going to see the movie either way, so
don't watch it then, man.
Yeah,
it was the trailer. It was the first trailer that, even though I'm going to see it, obviously, but it was the first trailer that I was like, the first thing I saw about it, I was like, okay, now I'm like kind of excited about it. It looked really cool. So I'm definitely down for it. But for all I know, I don't know what the schedule is right now. It's got to be pretty close to coming out by the time this episode comes out.
May have already come out. Might be the biggest thing in the world. Might have
no. It definitely hasn't come out yet because we're only like 3 or 4 episodes ahead now. So I think, or 4 or 5 episodes ahead now. So we're not as far as we were ahead before. Where I was like, well, it's September and this episode's dropping in January. We're not there anymore. But yeah, so we will talk about Pan next week. Please subscribe to the podcast, rate and review it on your podcast platform of choice. IntrepidFilmographers.com will take you right to the Substack where you can subscribe to the podcast either on Substack or anywhere else. You can also check out video versions of the show there or on our YouTube channel. Please leave a review. It really, really helps. And we're going to finish off Joe Wright in a couple of weeks, and then we'll move on to Peter Jackson as our big director of the year. But until next time, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you to everybody who's listening. Be good to one another. Later.